What's going on, guys? Welcome back. And today I'm going to be talking about Andor Season 2. Now, Andor kind of caught the Star Wars fandom by storm a few years ago. After a slew of terrible TV shows, many people, including myself, were losing faith in the franchise. But Season 1 blew most of us away with how fantastic it was. So it suffices to say that Season 2 had a lot to live up to. For many of us, it was our last hope for Star Wars. And leading up to its release, I grew more and more concerned after hearing that it would heavily utilize my least favorite storytelling device in all of fiction, time jumps. This season is split into 4 3-episode arcs, which lead directly into the events of Rogue One, a Star Wars story, each of them jumping ahead by a year. And that worried me. I thought it could lead to condensed and rushed storytelling. Thankfully, however, Season 2 delivers on almost every level. It is simply a masterclass in television storytelling and probably the best Star Wars content we've ever received. To kick things off, it really can't be overstated how much of a role the production design plays in selling us on the authenticity of the Star Wars galaxy in this show. I believe it was the most expensive Star Wars production in recent times, and it shows, because these locations feel like real places rather than a green screen or digital wall background like they typically do in these Star Wars television shows. The expansiveness of the sets and locations and the detail contained within tells us a great deal about these various different cultures across the show without everything needing to be verbalized to the audience. A large chunk of this season is dedicated to developing the Gorman culture, as their identity is gradually being whittled away by the Empire's oppression. The amount of time we spend on that planet seeing the inner workings of this society makes their eventual fate all the more tragic. And as far as the cast goes, there isn't a weak link there either. I couldn't possibly list off everyone who delivers a killer performance in this show, so I'll just talk about a few of the standouts in my mind. Diego Luna is obviously fantastic. There's a lot being asked of him to carry this show, and he's firing on all cylinders this season. I've always been a fan of his, and I'm so happy for him that he got the opportunity to complete this story that he was clearly passionate about, not only as an actor, but also as a producer. Elizabeth Dulau as Clea is kind of the sleeper star of this season. She was a minor player in Season 1, but once they start peeling back the layers of her character towards the end of Season 2, I was enthralled by her performance, which is incredibly impressive considering the fact that this was her first role outside of theater. She had never taken on a film or TV role of this scale before. What a fantastic actress. I can't wait to see what she does in future. Robert Ems as Lonnie Young was also a standout, in my opinion. Another minor player in the previous season who really gets the chance to showcase his acting chops. To be honest, Lonnie's the real MVP of the show, if you ask me. The true hero of Star Wars by all accounts, and it's a shame that he'll never be remembered. But none of these elements would work if the script wasn't as good as it is. What I was afraid this season would be going into it is something akin to these new Tales of the Empire, Tales of the Underworld shows we've gotten recently, which are essentially just bite-sized chunks of story with little to be taken away from them. But Each chunk of episodes in Andor Season 2 was like a delicious gourmet meal with an incredibly rich dessert on top, because there's so much substance to be found in these episodes. It's very efficient storytelling, where no time is wasted, aside from maybe, like, the first two episodes, where Cassian had that weird subplot getting stuck with these clown rebel guys who started killing each other for no reason, which really just felt like an excuse to delay Cassian so he couldn't rescue his friends sooner. But aside from that, every other episode or arc in this season is intricately constructed. I can't tell you how refreshing it was tuning into this show every week for the last month to experience a new Star Wars story that treated its audience with respect rather than being easily consumable garbage you can put on in the background while doom scrolling on your Instagram account. Every dialogue exchange, every look, every minute detail has meaning. All that sweet, sweet subtext where everything has multiple meanings, which are left up to the interpretation of the audience. Significant narrative payoffs, like Bix finally getting her revenge on Dr. Gorst, who tortured her in the previous season, or the Gorman genocide, one of the most horrifically real depictions of violence we've ever seen in Star Wars, are built on the characters' choices. Cyril Karn is possibly one of the most tragic characters in the entire Star Wars franchise. A man hell-bent on preserving justice and upholding the law, whose decision to pursue Cassian in Season 1 was the catalyst for the entire story. Yet, when he finally comes face to face with Andor again, he doesn't even know who he is. Someone manipulated by this galactic empire into facilitating a cultural genocide, and when the inevitable consequences of his actions come to pass, all he can do is sit back and watch. The stakes in this show feel high, because the characters aren't invincible Terminators like Mando, who will never die because they're encased in literal plot armor. We know they're just regular people doing what they can to try and topple this massive galactic regime. In that sense, the show does a great job enhancing the thematic framework of Star Wars, that every small action counts. As the characters in this show say, rebellions are built on hope. Seeing every decision made in the final 3 episodes of this season leading into Rogue One, seeing that the rebellion would never have learned of Project Stardust. Luke Skywalker would never have been able to fly down that trench and blow up the Death Star if it weren't for the sacrifices of these ordinary folk who will never be remembered in the books of history. Cassian Andor, this nobody by all accounts, always came through for those around him. That is something the show continually reinforces. The rebellion was united. That's why the Empire's short-sighted tyranny was always doomed to fail. They could continue committing atrocities like the Gorman Massacre, but all that does is push people to join the cause against them. The code phrase used by all of our characters in the rebellion is, "I have friends everywhere," because at the end of the day, they did. How does this show end? It's with our heroes thriving and living their lives, whereas our Imperial characters are either in prison or committing suicide, because they failed. All they did for the entire series was backstab each other at every turn to further their own goals. But the rebellion won because of all these connections that they had built up. Something else commendable about this season in particular is the amount of reverence and respect the creative team showed for the lore of Star Wars. If this were a Dave Filoni production, he'd be rewriting history all over the place if it suited him. But Tony Gilroy and his team went out of their way to ensure that Andor fits snugly into the pre-established canon, to a point where Mon Mothma's escape from the Senate in Episode 9 links up seamlessly with Star Wars Rebels Season 3, where she is escorted by Gold Squadron and the Ghost Crew to Yavin 4. And I can't go on without mentioning the musical score, which was not composed entirely by Nicholas Britell this time around. Instead, Brandon Roberts stepped in to fill his shoes. And at first I was unsure what I thought of his approach, but as the season progressed, his musical stylings grew on me, especially once he interwove them with Britell's themes from Season 1, even reincorporating some of the best tracks from the previous season at pivotal emotional moments, namely using the eulogy track from Marva's funeral in Season 1 during Mon Mothma's powerhouse speech in Episode 9, or reprising the past/present suite at the very end of the season as Cassian is heading off on his last mission. Fun fact, they actually got the soloist Grace Davidson to work on this show, performing the Gorman anthem, who also worked on the Hobbit films and performed Gollum's song in a live orchestral showing of The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers that I watched last year. Now, this is the point in the video where I try to get down and dirty and criticize the show, which is quite challenging because, as we've discussed, it's a hard show to criticize. This is as close to perfect as Star Wars is ever liable to get. However, that doesn't mean that it isn't flawed in some areas. One of my biggest issues with the show, in the grand scheme of things, is that until the last 3 episodes where Dedra threatens Luthen or the strike team uses a stun grenade on Clea, Cassian, and Melshi, the characters seem to forget that stun rounds exist. You know that thing that was established in the first film ever in the franchise? I don't want to make it sound like I'm playing a comparison game or anything, because Andor is without a doubt the best written piece of Star Wars content we've ever gotten, but one of the reasons why The Bad Batch remains my personal favorite Star Wars show is that we are continually shown our lead characters using stun blasts on enemy combatants, namely their fellow clones, who are technically their brethren, which tells us a great deal about them without it needing to be said in explicit dialogue. Now, obviously, if you are a rebel insurgent causing problems, the Empire is going to use lethal fire against you. However, there are scenes in this season where even the good guys are fighting with each other and clearly don't want to hurt the other person, yet they resort to lethal fire for some reason. For example, a crucial moment in the 6th episode of the season is Cinta getting killed accidentally by a stray blaster bolt as a result of 2 Gorman rebels fighting with each other over a blaster that isn't supposed to be there. The scene would have made more sense if the younger of the 2 rebels threatening his ally with the blaster had just switched his weapon to the stun setting and knocked him out, but that way they couldn't have facilitated the dramatic outcome that they wanted. And this is another extremely minor thing, but several people have pointed out how the Imperial security droids, including K2SO, are blaster-proof now, despite that definitely not having been the case in the past, because you know what kills K2SO in Rogue One? Getting shot with a bunch of blasters. I understand that for the purposes of this show, that works to make the Imperial droids feel like a quite literal, unstoppable threat. But at the expense of continuity, I'm not sure how I feel about that. And that leads us into my biggest and perhaps only major issue with this season. I kind of already hinted at it earlier, but despite the time jumps ultimately working out in the story's favor, I feel like they were also a bit of a detriment. That's not to say that they didn't work, or that they negatively affected the story in the ways I was expecting. This isn't an Avengers Endgame situation where the writers used a 5-year time jump to leave several character arcs unresolved, or skipped over the development of some characters that desperately needed it. As previously stated, this show uses time efficiently. Very little of it is wasted, but as far as I understand, this series was originally meant to be 5 seasons, but they condensed it down to 2, which leaves me wondering what it would have looked like had they been given the full amount of time they wanted to tell the story. I think the character Willman suffers as a result of the story structure they went with. We pick up with him at the beginning of the season on the planet Mina Rao with his pals Bix and Brasso. He's even got a girlfriend now, but the Empire shows up and kills Brasso, so he's pissed. He gets recruited/kidnapped by Saw Gerrera, who kind of inducts him into the rebellion. We don't really see what happens with that. He goes back to Cassian. They travel to Gorman together, where he's got a new girlfriend. He gets injured, but survives, and he's the one that intercepts Clay's distress message, which Cassian responds to. He's just kind of a random character who's pulled in many different directions, and I can't isolate a specific journey that he went on over the course of the season. I can't help but feel that in a longer show, that character's journey may have been more clearly defined. That's not to say that any of what I just described is bad, or that it doesn't work in the show. It's just that what we did get was so good, I wish there was more. Which some might say is a good thing. You should want more out of a quality show like Andor, and adversely, it could be argued that it's a good thing the creators didn't feel a need to drag the show out or extend it past its prime to a point where it lost what made it so special. I'm genuinely curious to hear what people have to say on this topic. But at the end of the day, when my biggest problem with your show is that it's so good I wish there was more of it, I think that's a solid indicator of its quality. And in this modern world of homogenized entertainment, I'm overjoyed that a story like Andor squeezed through the cracks and delivered what I think is some of the best Star Wars storytelling ever made. They managed to make a 5-minute sequence of a dude walking in slow motion to his ship one of the most emotionally evocative scenes I've watched on television in the past several years. That's a commendable feat, if you ask me. But you guys let me know. What are your thoughts on Andor Season 2? Do you agree with everything I said? Do you disagree with anything that I said? Just whatever your thoughts are, please let me know them all in the comments below. And of course, as always, I hope you guys have a great day. Take care.